Before we kick off today's podcast, I'd like to say a big thank you to everyone who's listened to the show, subscribed, and given us a review. Our mission here on the podcast is to help Bangkok build its strongest life. And as we gain more listeners to the podcast, we can help more people do just that. Now, today's highlighted review is from Adam, and Adam's review says, the team at Base are changing the industry for the better, and this podcast is another great example. Love the bite-sized, easy-to-follow format. Episodes are relatable and offer quick tips to use in your daily routines. Really happy the podcast has helped you, Adam. Thank you for your review. If you haven't reviewed the podcast yet, please do, and please share this info with anyone who you think might benefit, anyone who wants to live their strongest Bangkok life. Let's get cracking. Here is part 2 of our interview with base coach Jason, and today is on nutrition for performance. Welcome to the Build Your Base podcast. I am very happy to be welcoming back Jason Deknatel to the podcast. Thanks again for joining us, Jason.
Hey Jack, glad to be here. Good to be back.
So in our last episode, we talked about the importance of resistance training in everyone's program. Today, we are talking about a topic which is brought up often by our clients, which is nutrition for performance. How should we be eating? How should we be drinking to fuel top quality performance? So if anyone wants to know more about Jason and Jason's story, they can go back to episode 7 of the podcast. So we're going to jump straight into it today. I want to start off with hydration. Basically, how much should we be drinking when we're training?
Yeah, that's an interesting one actually, because it's one of those where you feel like you really have to plan meticulously, but honestly, in most cases, the answer is as simple as just drink when you're thirsty. Like most people, who get people come to base classes, you're indoors, you're in AC, we have breaks. What are you doing class? That 2-minute break in between or during PT, you'll always have breaks. Literally just have a bottle of water nearby, drink when you're thirsty, and you'll be fine, The only time I'd probably say you'd have to plan it a little bit better, you're outdoors for hours and hours, maybe like you're doing some sort of a one-day sports tournament where you're playing 8 a.m. to noon. American football teams in universities or even professionals during the off-season in the summer, they'll be training 2, 3, sometimes even 4 times a day. And what they do is they'll weigh their players because it's so hot. It's nearly 40 degrees in some places during the summer. They'll weigh themselves before the session, weigh themselves after the session, and basically try and replace the fluids they lost. But that's in your more extreme cases, try to replace the fluids and electrolytes. But that's literally because 300-pound guys in 40-degree weather outside in the sun for 3 hours, But yeah, for the most part, I'd say literally just drink when you're thirsty. Our body does not want to die of dehydration. So we have a pretty good mechanism built in place that lets us know when we need some fluids.
And that mechanism is called being thirsty.
Being thirsty, yeah. But yeah, because drinking too much, especially for most people's case when they're just exercising in the gym or just going for a run in the park, drinking too much can actually negatively impact your performance. There is such thing as having too much water. So yeah, for most people, literally just drink when you're thirsty. And if you feel like you aren't drinking enough or you're thirsty and sort of ignore it, have a water bottle in your hand or around you at all times.
Yeah. What should we be drinking? Water? Or is there anything better than water?
Water's probably the best thing. Again, if you're losing lots of water, you're out in the sun for hours and hours exercising, playing sports, have some electrolytes by you. Either those are orange electrolyte packs. Gatorade's probably all right, but I don't know if you're like me where if you have something sweet while you're pretty dehydrated, I sort of feel a little bit ill after that. So yeah, just your electrolyte packs are fine.
Nothing beats H2O. It occurs naturally on the planet and it does the job pretty well. So let's talk about a few different goals that people might have. Let's say we have someone such as yourself that really focuses on powerlifting and strength training, and then someone who's going for an Ironman competition, so more of an endurance athlete. What considerations should we take into place when we look at different goals such as endurance and strength?
Yeah, when it comes to more sort of nutrition for optimizing performance, then I'd probably be a little more specific on the macros. So for strength, someone like me, like a powerlifter, you still want to hit your protein macros of about 2 grams per kilogram of body weight. So
just quickly, Jason, can you define macros just if anyone doesn't know?
Oh yeah, so macronutrients are basically proteins, carbohydrates, and fats. Those are the 3 macros we have. And the main ones I focus on for any athlete would be carbohydrates and protein. Protein more so for the muscle protein synthesis, repair, building. Yeah, for strength athletes, you definitely want to aim for about 2 grams per kilogram of body weight. So if I weigh 80 kilos, I want to hit about 160 grams of protein. Bear in mind, that's not entirely just from meat, you do get a little bit of protein from your carbohydrates, also like rice, pasta, quinoa, whatnot. And then for carbohydrates, for strength athlete, I'd probably keep it about 2 to 5 grams per kilograms of body weight. Again, it depends on your preference. Like being a Thai boy, I like my rice, I like my carbs. I'll be in the higher end of that. But also, it does help your performance. Carbs are your most efficient source of energy in the sense of how quickly it can be converted to energy, especially with like a powerlifting training session. It can last anywhere between 90 minutes to 2.5 hours. So you want the carbohydrates to last you through that. Endurance athletes, it's going to be more so based off the NSCA guidelines, the National Strength and Conditioning Association guidelines. It's going to be closer to about 8 to 10 grams per kilogram of body weight. And that's purely because, like a triathlete or marathon runner, they're going for much longer. My training, I have a fair amount of rest in between sets, whereas they're sort of like non-stop the whole way. So they need a little bit more fuel. You even see like triathletes and marathon runners, they sort of have like these little glucose packs during their race that they just sort of pop in just so they replenish their glycogen stores. But protein for them, I'd also keep that at about 2 grams per kilogram body weight, just so there's not too much of muscle protein breakdown. Yeah, so protein, I basically keep pretty constant for most people. Maybe for endurance athletes, you probably want to up the fats a little bit more, because at low intensities, you do tend to use a little bit more fat oxidation for your energy at low intensities and longer durations, when your glycogen stores are closer to being depleted.
So you give some good numbers there that people can work with. Would you recommend that people really specifically aim for those numbers, i.e. weigh their food, record how much they're consuming to make sure they're hitting the right amounts of proteins, carbs, and fats for their goals?
I'd always recommend trying to control as many variables as possible. Like if you're really serious about it, you really do want to be as accurate as you can, control as many variables as possible. Weighing your food or just like looking up the macros on it does go a long way, but for most people that's just so tedious and it almost throws you off wanting to do your diet. So what I do is maybe like spend a couple weeks tracking it a little bit just so you get an idea of how much you're consuming. And then, if you're eating somewhat like day-to-day eating 70-80% each day, you'll have a good idea of how much you're actually taking in. So yeah, I'd say spend a couple weeks like tracking what you're eating, what the macros are. After you get a hang of it, then you're pretty much thereabouts in terms of hitting your macros. You don't have to be too strict on it. Sport athletes, especially at the top level, they don't do this themselves. They have dietitians who calculate all this for them. They basically put the food on the plate for them and say, eat it. Like they had someone who's basically going through the med school equivalent of nutrition and food science to calculate all this for them. So yeah, for the general population, don't worry too much about getting everything right to the gram, unless you're someone like that who likes to know the specifics. Just spend a couple weeks learning about this stuff a little bit, checking the macros, maybe weighing the food if you have food scale, but then you'll get a pretty good idea of like how much is in what you eat. Like I don't think people change their diet so drastically week after week.
Yeah, I do like that suggestion. I think from what I've seen is that people really gain a lot from recording their nutrition, quite closely for at least 3 to 5 days at the very least. And then you start to get a good idea of what 160 grams of protein feels like to eat and how much protein is contained within one chicken breast or whatever it is that you might be eating. And you start to just develop that more intuitive sense, I think, of how much you're consuming. And then you can start to relax the MyFitnessPal apps and everything else.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's honestly what I was doing. Like the first time I properly cut, I did sort of I was really on top of my macros and my calories. But then after like a couple of weeks, I just sort of knew how much I was eating roughly. And then in terms of calories, I just basically just add a little bit or take a little bit away because I have a pretty good idea of like what I'm eating and how much I'm eating.
That's the ultimate goal, I think, is just to have that intuitive sense and not need to have to record it so closely, but still know you're doing the right things. But it just takes a bit of work, I think, to actually get to that stage. Now, Jason, you talked about protein consumption, how much protein we should be eating. It's quite a contentious topic, actually. People have different opinions on it. Just how important, if you are trying to build muscle, is getting the right amount of protein in? What does the science say?
I'd say it's probably the second most important thing after total calorie intake. Like if you are trying to build muscle, you do want to be in caloric surplus. So yeah, I say protein is number 2 on that priority list. And the main body of evidence suggests anywhere between 1.6 grams to 2.2 to 2.5 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight. I say 2 grams just because it makes the math a lot easier for a lot of people. But also, if you don't quite hit that 2, you still probably most likely hit that 1.6. gram per kilogram minimum. Most evidence would suggest about 1.6 to 2.2, 2.5 grams per kilogram of body weight. And again, as your body weight changes drastically, you know, if you're someone who, let's say you went on a massive weight loss, you went from 90 kilos to 70 kilos, that number will probably drop a little bit as you are generally a smaller human.
Is it fair to say that a lot of this is kind of trial and error? You have to kind of see how your body responds and adjust accordingly, or do you just stick directly to the numbers?
Yeah, a lot of it is like individualized personal preference. You know, some people just find it just almost impossible to eat that amount of protein. You know, even if you're including the protein from your food, like they just physically can't get themselves to eat that much. So that's where sort of like your liquid protein, your liquid calories come in, like your protein supplements. Like those are an easy way to just add a bit more protein, easy way to get the calories in. You just have to drink something.
Let's talk about pre and post workout. It's a very common question. What should I be eating before my session? What should I be eating after? I remember back in the day, I thought that you had to down a protein shake within 17 minutes of your workout. Otherwise you'd lose all your gains. What should we be eating before and after? Oh, it's 18 minutes, is it? Sorry, I thought it was 17.
No, I'm kidding. Yeah. Yeah. If you don't drink within 20 minutes, then that workout was wasted.
Right. Yeah, it means nothing.
Yes, pre-workout, you'd probably want something that you eat regularly so you don't upset your stomach. You know, like if you know eating a nice spicy curry, you're going to be on the toilet in a couple hours, maybe don't eat that before you work out. Eat something that you know your stomach agrees with, doesn't upset your intestines or digestive system too much. In terms of macros, again, you want to have some sort of carbohydrates for the energy, a little bit of protein in there. The only thing I'd say is there is evidence to suggest that having too much fat pre-workout can hinder performance. So maybe don't have like full fat milk with peanut butter sandwich before you work out. You know, save that for afterwards. Have some source of carbohydrates, you know, your rice, your breads, your pastas, quinoa, whatnot, and have some sort of protein. That doesn't have to be chicken breast. You know, if you like pork, you can have your pork. You can have eggs, you can have fish. You know, chicken breast isn't the only source of protein that's out there.
Bacon, beef.
Maybe limit the bacon a little bit. You know, a little bit here and there is fine, but I wouldn't make that a staple in your diet.
Any vegan options if we have any vegetarians or vegans out there listening?
Tofu is a great source of protein. I believe soybean. I guess one misconception about vegan diets is it's impossible to build muscle in a vegan diet. Like that's not true, but you do have to take into account the bioavailability of protein in plant sources. Most plant-based foods are incomplete protein, so they don't contain all 9 essential amino acids, but you can mix and match certain plant-based foods. So like take rice, for example. Rice is lacking one sort of essential amino acid, but bean has that. So they sort of complement each other in that sense. So you can get all 9 essential amino acids by putting those two together. Yeah, soy, tofu, they are what we call complete sources of protein. So they have all 9 essential amino acids. Because of the digestibility and bioavailability of the protein in plant sources, you just, you know, that 2 grams per kilogram of body weight, you might want to go a little bit over that just to sort of like be safe and make sure you're hitting that number, because we don't quite absorb as much protein from plants as we do from animals.
And how about timing for eating before the workout? Is there any thoughts or research on that?
Yeah, if possible, I'd probably try not to eat less than an hour. Now, ideally, maybe an hour and a half, 2 hours before you eat. You know, the closer you get to that workout, the smaller that window is. I'd make that meal a little bit smaller because, again, you don't want to be full. You don't want to feel bloated or stuffed and then, you know, do base burn or something. You know, your lunch will be on the floor. So yeah, if you can, try to keep it about 2 hours before so you can have a decent sized meal beforehand. But, you know, work gets in the way or life gets in the way and you haven't eaten anything, maybe get a little bit of food in, some sort of carbohydrate in, just give you some energy, but don't eat too much because then, you know, you just won't be feeling great during the workout at all.
What about post-workout then? We talked about protein consumption after your workout. What about just general nutrition
protein
afterwards?
Within 20 minutes, that workout is wasted. No, for everybody listening, that's a complete joke. Yeah, that whole anabolic window, it's more like a barn door where, you know, muscle protein synthesis after a workout, particularly anything involving resistance training, your muscle protein synthesis sort of peaks at about 2 hours afterwards and stays elevated for up to 24 hours. It is a gigantic barn door that's pretty hard to miss. Someone like me, my training, it might last an hour and a half, 2 hours, considering I haven't eaten an hour before that. It's been a good 3-4 hours since I've eaten, so I'm going to be hungry anyway. So post-workout, I'm always trying to get some sort of carbohydrate in just to replenish those glycogen stores, give me a bit of energy back. And obviously you want to get some protein in for the muscle protein synthesis, repairing and rebuilding the muscle you are using.
What's your thoughts on micronutrients, like vitamins and nutrients within the food? Like when we're looking at performance, is it just the macros we look at, the carbs, the fats, the proteins, or is it important to get those carbs, fats, and proteins from more nutrient-dense sources?
Yeah, the macros are more so from just from an energy and muscle protein synthesis standpoint, but obviously your micros are as important just for daily functions as well. You think about like your general health really. So you want to get your vegetables in. That's something I admit I probably could do better at. Variety of vegetables. Some people keep it simple, just sort of like eat a rainbow, have like a variety of colors in your vegetables, green, orange, yellow, bit of purple here and there. Supplementation, I probably wouldn't go that far if you're eating enough vegetables. Only like certain cases, like I've got a mate who grew up his whole life, didn't eat a single vegetable his whole life, so he had to supplement just because he wasn't getting it from his nutrition. But if you're eating a fair amount of vegetables these days, like Priya had a good podcast in the early episode, she touched on that. Eat your veggies, eat your vegetables. And if you can admit, you're not eating enough vegetables, maybe consult with someone about maybe a vitamin supplementation. But again, I probably wouldn't recommend that. And just try get into nutrition.
Okay, good tips. I want to finish up with endurance training. So we're talking about marathons, Ironman, stuff like that. I do get asked from time to time. What tips do you have, or how should we be approaching our nutrition if we're doing a lot of training, a lot of hours of cardio and endurance training?
I zoom out a little bit more and just look at the whole picture, not just nutrition. I like to look at training as sort of like a three-legged stool where you have your nutrition as one leg, training as the other leg, and recovery as the third leg. Like you really want all three of those to be optimized as best as you can. If one of those are suboptimal, then your performance is going to be suboptimal. So again, like the recommendations I made earlier about the carbohydrate intake, about 8 to 10 grams per kilogram of body weight for carbohydrates, 2 grams per kilogram of protein, and sort of fats is sort of like whatever your preference. Training, as important as it is to train, recovery is also as important. If you're just constantly training, hammering yourself day after day, you're not going to recover. You're going to increase your risk of injury. If you're injured, you're going to get laid off for even long time, which is even more detrimental. That's the last thing you want. I basically plan my training, not just for myself, but for my clients, or program for a triathlete before. Their training is based around recovery. Have they recovered enough to do this again that week? Powerlifting, for example, if I squat on Monday, I'm going to be knackered for Tuesday. I'm not going to squat maybe a day or two after that, just because my legs are fatigued, but my chest is fine, or maybe you can do something a little more posterior dominant because my hamstrings aren't really that fatigued. So I really sort of like playing training around recovery, making sure not necessarily just rest days. If you're a triathlete, you don't want to bike, run, swim every single day, day after day. Maybe have like a high intensity bike in the morning, a low intensity swim, and then the next day you can have like a high intensity run, a low intensity bike. So sort of like alternating high stress, low stress, high stress, low stress. So sort of like balances out a bit, and have those rest days. Make sure you're eating. Think about those three things and try to optimize nutrition, training, and recovery as best as you can. If even one of those things is a little bit off, you will see in your performance. I don't want to throw any names out, but this person knows who I'm talking about when I say this, but their sleep was absolutely awful. They were still training well, eating well, but the rest and recovery was, they'll admit it was dreadful. And then the 1 week they, actually started sleeping a bit more, that person came into me, it's just like, man, I feel great. Who would have thought sleeping and recovering makes you feel better? And when you feel better, you can train a little bit harder and train a little bit better.
Yeah, I really like that, Jason. I totally agree that one feeds into the other. You get your recovery part right, and then you feel better for your training. And then when you're training hard, you kind of feel motivated to get on top of your nutrition a little bit more. And I think just one feeds nicely into the other. And I think for sure we will get you back on the podcast to talk more about recovery, because I think out of those three things, recovery is the one that's most often neglected.
Yeah, 100%.
Thank you for sharing your thoughts, Jason. I really appreciate it. We will get you back on the podcast soon to talk more about recovery. Where can we get in touch with you?
I'm happy to answer anyone's message. So honestly, feel free to message me on Instagram or Facebook. Or if you're part of the Base Anywhere group, just feel free to tag me in a post if you have any questions, or just message me directly. I'm always happy to help. Happy to have a chat.
Awesome. We'll leave links to contact you in the show notes of the episode, Jason. Thanks again for joining us. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on nutrition for performance, and we'll catch you soon.
So thanks for having me, Jack.